walking around Berkeley with Matthew Lewis of California YIMBY, and we're looking at the absolute horror, we're kidding here, of what it's like to have multifamily housing in single-family neighborhoods.
If you take a look down the street, it looks like a normal suburban street. The houses are very low. It doesn't feel like an oppressive urban environment. But what we're going to find as we actually go down just these few blocks is that there's a whole bunch of apartments that are no longer legal to build. And so it begs the question, if people are very worried about building apartments in their neighborhood because they worry about neighborhood character, my question is, well, there's a good chance you already live in that neighborhood and you just weren't aware of it. So part of what we're going to do here is demystify what multifamily housing looks like and show that it's not the horrible Hong Kong or Singapore style nightmares that a lot of the anti-housing people try to sell to us. So I want to just point across the street here because it's a great example of the kind of contrast we're talking about, that where we could actually solve a huge share of our housing shortage by just kind of going back to the future and allowing the kind of homes that were legal up until these anti-housing folks downzoned their neighborhoods and made it illegal to build multifamily. So here you've got a single-family home on the corner, nice mid-century stucco. You've got another one next to it, very similar style, mid-century stucco. You go down to the next one, and there's more sort of a classic Berkeley architectural style with the cedar shingles. You'll see those all over this part of town. But then, look right here. This is, I'm gonna guess, a 1940s, 1930s era multifamily apartment building. Now, does it look like an apartment building like you would see in, say, Manhattan or Chicago? No. Does that matter? No. You can see just here from the electric meters, there's at least 4 separate units in this building. And it's literally across the street from 2 single-family homes that are nicely designed, have nice architecture. But the point is there's 4 times as many units here as there are in the house across the street. And it completely not only fits into the neighborhood, it's here in the neighborhood. It's been here in the neighborhood for at least 50 years. The notion of allowing more homes in your neighborhood is not nearly the end of the world catastrophe that a lot of the anti-housing voices who live in this neighborhood claim it is. And I actually think it's sort of tragic that they don't just walk around their own neighborhood and realize, actually, I already live in a neighborhood like this, so we can actually do more of this and it won't hurt me.
And I'm wondering if you could explain in some detail what SB 9 and SB 10 do and why they're so significant.
The cause of the housing shortage and affordability crisis in California is largely due to extremely restrictive zoning codes in most cities that make it illegal to build more housing. As we saw on our little tour here, that the kinds of homes we're talking about actually already exist in a lot of California neighborhoods, but they were made illegal 30, 40, 50 years ago. So SB 9 and SB 10 are 2 laws that I kind of describe as a back to the future law. They return zoning in most California cities to something that allows more homes to be built within residential neighborhoods like this. They do it in very different ways. SB 9 is essentially a duplex law. What it allows you to do is it allows you to build a whole other home on your property if you have a single family property now that's zoned for just 1 unit. SB 9 allows you to build 2 units on that property. It also allows you to split your property into 2 separate properties. So under the baseline version of the law, you can build a duplex, you can split your property in 2, and then you can have 2 duplexes, 1 on each newly created property. So you can go from 1 home to 4 under SB 9. Now, theoretically, in some cities, you could actually do a little more. You're allowed to also build accessory dwelling units in the state of California on properties zoned for single family or duplex. But under SB 9, cities have the discretion to not allow you to do an ADU. But at the very least, for most places where SB 9 would apply, you'd be allowed to do up to 4 homes. So that's what SB 9 does, and that's something that is now state law. And if you have a single unit house on a single unit property, you can check and see if you qualify for SB 9 and apply for that now, like it's legal to do. SB 10 is a pretty different law, so I won't go into the full complexity, but under state housing law, cities and their regions that they're in are required to come up with something every 7 years called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. Yes, it is a very bureaucratic process. But it has a good purpose, which is to try to help a region plan for the housing it needs for future residents. This is something that California has done very poorly over the last 3 or 4 decades, as we can see by the housing shortage today. So the state has passed a series of laws over the last really 15, 17 years to try to nudge cities along. And one of them is this requirement that you come up with an assessment of all the homes in your jurisdiction, and you sort of anticipate, based on growth, how many more homes you're going to need in the future. Now, the key to that is you actually have to change the zoning so that you can build those homes, so that somebody can come, whether it's a market rate developer can build those homes or a nonprofit affordable housing developer. Either way, you've got to create the land use rules that allow you to build those homes. Now, there's a problem in California. Anytime you change a land use in a city, you have to go through an environmental impact report process under something called the California Environmental Quality Act. This is a very long and complicated process. It can actually take years to complete an EIR for a new housing development if the existing zoning doesn't already have an environmental assessment. The law was created originally with generally good intent. It was to protect air quality, protect water quality, to prevent industrial facilities from dumping pollution into waterways and into the air. But it since has kind of mushroomed into this beast of unintended consequences. And now CEQA, as it's referred to, the California Environmental Quality Act, has done a lot to really slow down environmentally beneficial projects. Just to give you a sense, CEQA is used to block bicycle lanes. CEQA is used to block bus lanes. CEQA is used to block solar panel installations. So you can see that the law has sort of lost its way a little bit.
And it's used by unions to negotiate better wage contracts.
It's used by all kinds of people to do things that isn't necessarily directly related to environmental quality. That said, coming back to this regional housing needs assessment, in order to meet your zoning under it's called RHNA, colloquially by housing advocates, you have to have the zoning, the compliant zoning, in order to meet your assessment needs. If you don't have that, you're going to lose a lot of state benefits, and the state is increasingly coming down on cities that don't meet their RHNA housing requirements. This is all a very long-winded explanation, but it's very relevant to SB 10. What SB 10 does is it says to cities that are looking at their regional housing needs assessment and realizing we don't have the zoning and we don't have an environmental impact report, and we won't have the zoning or the environmental impact report in time to meet our deadline for RHNA. SB 10 says if you find yourself in that position, you can go around your city, locate sites with a single unit of housing, or maybe it's 2 units of housing, or maybe it's a commercial spot, and you can zone that property for up to 10 units if it's near transit or if it's in a walkable neighborhood, like the one we're in here in Berkeley, and you don't have to go through CEQA. The reason this is so important is that it dramatically streamlines the process that a city can use to zone for up to 10 home apartments or multiplexes. It doesn't have to be 10, it could be 6, it could be 4, it could be whatever they need to meet their RHNA assessment. And because of its requirement that it be located in a walkable neighborhood, like we're in North Berkeley, or near transit, like we are in North Berkeley, we're very close to BART stations, there's a bus stop right there on the corner, you actually end up with a measurable environmental benefit from locating those homes in areas where people don't have to drive. And of course, multifamily housing has dramatically lower energy and resource use than single unit homes. And so you have an environmental benefit from that as well. What you really want, not just for urbanism, not just for equity, not just for affordability, but also for climate change, to achieve all your other policy objectives around providing people access to good schools, good health care, good services, you want this proximity. And so Berkeley actually started along the way of doing that. Here we can see this. Oh, actually, you know what? I got myself. So I thought that this was a single family house with a classic cedar shingle style. You can see if you look over here, it's actually a multifamily building. Fooled me. You've got at least 2 addresses here. I can see 2. You know what? 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 apartments in that building right there. And if you look behind you, you've got an almost identical home, cedar shingle, classic Berkeley style. I only see 1 meter, so maybe this is just one house. Yep, it looks like it is. But looking across the street, that's a 4-unit building and a 1-unit building. And I don't think the average person who walks through this neighborhood would ever even know that.
Yeah, and as I've always seen it, on some of these old strip malls in Southern California along like Beach Boulevard in Orange County, these old things, and there's nothing wrong with those. You know, people have their lives and their businesses in them, but they're really underutilized.
Very underutilized.
So it will allow.
Not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
So it's really important because the key to getting it through the legislature with it is streamlining for CEQA was being able to show that based on prior state law and the rules that we have around air pollution and water quality, you have to show that it won't exacerbate air pollution. So if it's a strip mall out in the middle of nowhere that everybody has to drive to, it actually wouldn't qualify. There is another push though that's coming, and there's actually it's very exciting. So right now there's a bill moving through the legislature, AB 2011, that actually will allow by right affordable housing on commercial sites like strip malls all over the state of California. Again, they want to be close to transit, but it'll actually go way past 10 units. So you'll actually be able to do 20, 30, 40, 50 unit apartments on these sites with CEQA streamlining under AB 2011. That bill's under very tense negotiations right now. In fact, part of the political intrigue I was mentioning to you earlier, it's actually ongoing. But it's sort of building on this growing wave of desire in the state legislature and frankly among California's voters to say, you know what, we do see that these sites are underutilized. We do see that this commercial activity, there's nothing wrong with it, but why aren't there apartments on top of it? And that sort of like approach to urbanism and land use. And so you're going to see more and more of this sort of legislation kind of coming through that says, hey, we tried it with SB 10 with this particular type of housing. Let's do some more. That's not enough. Let's keep going. Let's keep pushing. Let's keep legalizing more homes on more of these underutilized sites. In the late 60s and early 1970s, Los Angeles downzoned itself dramatically. It went from allowing 10 million homes to 4 million homes. It literally wiped off the map the capacity for more than half of the housing that the city actually knew it was going to need. So now when you go to Los Angeles, 78% of the land in all of Los Angeles, you're only allowed to build a single unit home. You can't build an apartment building. You can't build a duplex. Well, now, thanks to California YIMBY and SB 9, you actually can build a duplex, although all the neighborhoods in LA are fighting to try to prevent that from happening. So this is part of what we're trying to do with state law, is crack open this resistance. But the point is, it's still 78% of the land that is having a very low intensity use in some of the most valuable land in the world for housing.
Well, and a lot of cities are finding all sorts of bizarre ways to get around SB 9 and 10, right?
Well, I mean, just to give you a sense of how bizarre it's gotten, here in Northern California, in the billionaire enclave of Woodside, they decided that their entire city was a mountain lion habitat, and therefore there was no more room for any housing. Now, I'm a big fan of big cats, but one thing I can tell you about them is they don't really go much into neighborhoods except to grab garbage at night. Otherwise, they kind of want to stay away from people. It was a very creative attempt to block new housing, but thankfully it got quickly shot down by the Attorney General, and they had to back off of that position. But that's just an example of the sort of creative ways that anti-housing activists in California try to make sure that they can preserve their neighborhoods in amber and never allow change to happen.
And what I was thinking, like in parts of in the LA basin, you'll have these usually built in the 40s and 50s. These actually they've become lovely neighborhoods of old bungalows and old tract houses, but they're kind of cool. They're just these narrow bands of old things where it seems like that. I believe those would be allowed multifamily housing in those kind of places.
Assuming there's good transit near them. And I think you're going to see this is increasingly a theme because, and for very good reason. Something you don't want to do as a matter of public policy is worsen other public health or related problems knowingly. And what we know in California is that the largest source of air pollution in many of these urban areas are the cars that are constantly driving around up and down all over the place. It has really severe consequences for the state because if you have low-income communities living with severe air pollution and they end up in the hospital, if they don't have adequate insurance or they're unemployed or what have you, the state ends up paying those health costs. So there's actually a state interest in trying to make sure that the policies it uses to address housing aren't making its balance sheet worse in other places.
Oh, sure,
And so what you'll see is this push to really try to locate these houses in areas that are walkable or with transit so that you can reduce the sort of mandate for people to drive everywhere, and it really is a mandate. Like if somebody wants to live in a walkable neighborhood, as we were talking about earlier, the price is so high, they're not allowed to. So you want to make it easier for them to do that. But you also want to make sure that the other side, and this is something that's coming up really quickly, there's a huge victory in Los Angeles on this just this week. You need to invest a lot more money in transit. You need to invest a lot more money in walkable infrastructure, so sidewalks. Here's the sort of joke that I use, and it's a classic example of how broken a lot of American policymaking is around this particular topic. So if you go to the typical American suburb or an area like outside of a major city and traffic gets really bad on a highway, the highway engineers will say, okay, well, they'll just widen the highway, they'll go to the legislature, they'll get a few $1 billion, they'll widen the highway. Every morning, if you walk around Manhattan, what do you find? The sidewalks are completely overcrowded. Why hasn't Manhattan widened the sidewalks?
You've got me.
Because we treat cars like a special category of mobility, and we don't fund mobility.
Right.
If we treated them the same, the sidewalks in Manhattan would be 2 to 3 times as wide as they are. Because, hey, if the idea is a too narrow road is the cause of traffic, then a too narrow sidewalk is also the cause of human traffic. But we don't think about it that way, and this is something that California is actually starting to get out ahead of. Moving right along, another one next door. This looks like it has also 4 apartments. Nice mid-century stucco, single entrance, so people can probably walk upstairs to their apartment or their flat, whatever it is. Yeah, they're everywhere when you actually stop to notice. So again, this looks like a normal house. There's 2 units here in the front and another one in the back on the side. This is what NIMBYs, the Not in My Backyard movement in California, this is what they're holding a revolution over. Is these types of homes that are already all through our communities. This is what they look like.
One of the frustrations I've had, I'm a free market guy.
Yeah.
I believe in free market land uses.
Yeah.
So if people want density, great. If they want to live in a rural area, great.
Yeah.
Let the market decide. And it doesn't really matter. I have no problem with things being next to other things.
Yeah.
I'm finding, I know this is going to shock you, that a lot of conservatives who I've often been allied with on issues aren't really free marketers when it comes to land use, at least around where they live.
Yeah.
So why haven't conservatives bought into it?
I think that one thing that I love working on housing for a bunch of reasons. One is because it's an urgent need, a human need, and we're actually trying to alleviate some pretty bad suffering that's out there. But the other thing is that the political intrigue around the topic is, for a political nerd like me, is both hilarious and fascinating. And I think that what you see is that housing kind of brings out the core hypocrisy of all major political ideologies. So while conservatives who have been fighting for 30 years for free markets and let the prices do what they're supposed to do, and property rights, and I should be able to do with my land, that's where they come from. On the other end, the progressives who say, oh, we're an inclusive community, we have a sign in our yard that say all lives matter, or Black Lives Matter, we welcome people, and this neighborhood welcomes all these folks. When it comes to housing, they don't actually follow up on that. And so I do think there's enough hypocrisy to go around on this topic. I think that what it comes down to really at the end of the day is that people are inclined to be afraid of things that they either aren't familiar with or just don't understand. And so our job, whether it's on the right or on the left, is to help both dissuade people of those irrational fears, because those fears are irrational. I mean, I think statistically people tend to be afraid of the wrong things, right? Like the most likely thing to kill you is a car, or more recently the pandemic, or a heart disease in this country. Right. Like those are the things that are going to knock you down, not a neighbor living in an apartment across the street. But we're afraid of the neighbor living across the street for reasons that are historic and cultural and frankly irrational, and it's not unique to the right. I mean, there's plenty of blame to go around.
I've noticed a lot of progressives when I write about that. Yeah. When I write about it for the newspaper, I'd hear from the conservatives who, we've got to protect our neighborhood, and I'd hear from the progressives who, there are enough people in California, they need to leave. I've seriously heard that from leftists.
You know, the Club of Rome and the Malthusians, they did a lot of damage to the progressive side of things in this country back in the day, and we're still overcoming that. Like, I think that you can trace these ideologies back through history and political time, and you can kind of see how they got this way. There's no angels really in this fight. So we've just got to do our best to both try to change policy, bring along the coalition that we've got, and where we can help people overcome their fears, great, but also recognize that some people just want to be afraid. Another one next door, very similar, also looks like it's been remodeled. Now, look across the street. You've got what looks to be, I'd say there's easily 25 apartments in that building. It's 4 stories. It's not crowding anything around here that I can see. There's a cypress tree. There's a giant redwood over there. There's a nice oak tree here. That looks like an acacia. This is maybe some kind of ficus, I'm not quite sure. But you can see it's a tree-lined street. It's lovely. The building is back off the street the way people like it. Some people have different preferences, but that's a preference for some. And as you can see, there are a lot of homes in that building. That is a lot of housing for a lot of people. Right across the street, two very lovely, I would guess, $2 million single-family homes here in Northbrook.
One last question on, on that political lines.
Yeah.
You and I mean, we have very different political philosophy, right? I'm broadly speaking on the right, being libertarian, and you're broadly speaking on the left. And yet you're one of the people who I agree with. Now, there's some of what you said that I cringe at.
Yeah, sure.
But overall, on this specific issue, you're one of the people I'm most closely aligned with. So
I appreciate that.
What explains that, do you think?
I think so. So we talk about this quite a bit at California YIMBY, and I think it's something. It's a real challenge. It's under attack in this country, and it's this notion of trying to be honest and transparent about the evidence supporting your beliefs. And it's a real hard thing to do, because as a species we're inclined to irrational beliefs. We're inclined to believe in deities and myths and all these sorts of things. But when it comes to these public policy questions where you've got a heterogeneous population, you can't really defer to an irrational belief in any group, because you're going to just anger all the other groups. So what we try to do at California YIMBY is say, look, we know that there is sort of like an ideological flavor that tends to come to YIMBYism, right? But we are not attached to all of their ideological points of view. We're really trying to make this an evidence-based policy-making conversation. And I think one reason why you and I can sit here and disagree on all this other stuff, but they'll still come together on this, is like, well, just look at the evidence. Like, it's true that there aren't enough homes. It's true that that's having horrible consequences for our cities. And it's true that the solution, we're putting aside the legal mechanism you want to use to get there. The solution is